I declare the Ordinary Council meeting of the 19th of April 2022 held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco open at 5:31 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We welcome their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. We pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and by being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Now, tonight's council meeting is going to be another hybrid, meaning that we've got two councillors attending by video with the remainder in person in the chambers. As a result, we're going to be voting by raise of hand, and I'll be calling two votes, those voting for the item and then those voting against. Okay, tonight we've got Councillor Simon White on a leave of absence, and he's been on leave since the 11th of April and he'll continue to be on leave until the 11th of May inclusive. It doesn't look like we've got any apologies tonight. Does anyone else have anything to submit in terms of a leave of absence or anything else? No. Disclosure of interest. Are there any disclosures for any of the items we're going to deal with tonight? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm sorry, it's not, I'm just trying to find it. Okay, here it is. I did read it out for both meetings last week, but it's a disclosure on C2, being about Lords, its impartiality. I am a member of the Lords Recreational Centre, and it's signed and dated. Thank you.
Just to confirm, you're making the same declaration as you did at last week's briefing. Okay, well, as long as we've got a written copy of that declaration, I'm sure that's okay. Okay, there were no public questions taken on notice, so that leads us to public question time, beginning with Peter McDonald of Onslow Road, Shenton Park.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors, CEO and staff. My question is in relation to agenda item C1, the development at 97 to 101 Evans. In the applicant's cover letter dated the 14th of March this year, the applicant seeks to amend condition 4 to remove the requirement for water harvesting reuse technologies. Given the City of Subiaco's commitment to urgent action and ambitious targets to address climate change and the city's status as the first certified carbon neutral local government in Western Australia, the proposed removal of the water harvesting reuse technologies appears to be out of step with the direction the city is taking on these issues. The developer states at page 5 of the cover letter that there's no way to accommodate water harvesting in this development without a significant redesign of the undercroft basement, which would lead to other negative design ramifications. However, the developer is silent on the potential for water reuse technologies as distinct from water harvesting technologies. The RIR's proposed amendment to condition 4 gives the developer the option of implementing either water harvesting or reuse technologies, and notes that the neighbouring new development at 95 Evans Street incorporated water harvesting or water reuse technologies. Could the City please advise what water harvesting or water reuse technologies were implemented in the neighbouring property just completed 95 Evans Street development? And in the view of the City, are there any unreasonable impediments to the developer in this case implementing water reuse technologies as distinct from water harvesting technologies?
Okay, it looks like we're going to have the Acting Manager Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. In relation to question 1, the constructed development at number 95 Evans Street contains a water-efficient irrigation system and water harvesting. The development includes 4 2,000-litre rainwater tanks, an integrated mains rains pressure pump, and a HydroWise smart controller with predictive watering to adjust schedules based on temperature forecast, rainfall probability, wind and humidity to maximise water savings. In response to question 2, it is considered that there are no impediments to the development implementing water reuse technologies such as grey water reuse. City officers have recommended that condition 4 is amended to provide an option of either water reuse technologies or water harvesting, as this aligns with the wording provided in the Residential Design Codes Volume 2.
Thank you. There were no more public questions. That brings us to public statement time. Do we have John Dawson from Onslow Road, Shenton Park here? Okay, we'll move on then to Dominic Nardelli, Development Manager on behalf of 97 to 101 Evans Street and 375 to 379 Railway Road, Shenton Park.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor, councillors and other staff members. By way of introduction, my name is Dominic Nardelli and I'm the nominated Development Manager for the owners at 97 to 101 Evans Street and 375 Railway Road in Shenton Park. We were online attendees to the briefing which took place on Tuesday the 12th of April and felt it would be beneficial to provide our input to some of the questions raised as I'm about to outline below. Point 1, general comment regarding overall documentation changes. There is naturally a requirement to make minor changes to documentation during the detailed design process to improve buildability, design and marketability of the residences. This is quite normal and is a natural part of an evolving documentation set from a base development application package of drawings. The changes are effectively minor and do not impact on the overall planning outcome resolved in the original approval. Point 2, on increased construction cost. The increased cost on the application was queried. This figure is a high-level estimate and reflects the current market. Sales prices have also increased, and this is of no consequence to our application. Point 3, dilapidation reports. Dilapidation reports are a natural part of the pre-construction process, which we have no issues undertaking where necessary. The dilapidation reports benefit the developer as well as impacted neighbours in the event of a dispute. Our intent was to avoid undertaking dilapidation reports where engineering advice indicates they are unnecessary. Given there were concerns evident during the councillor briefing session held on the 12th of April, the developer, in an act of good faith, is prepared to undertake dilapidation reports to all properties as required to provide a level of comfort to council on the topic. We have formally lodged this advice to the City on 14th of April 2022 by way of a letter from our authorised representative, Element Planning. I'll just note my statement, there was a typo for 14th of April 2022. Point 4, car stackers. Car stackers are designed appropriately so as to not cause excessive noise and are in common use across Perth and Australia. Planning policies and our codes have all been met, and the introduction of the car stackers is a market response given the importance to potential purchasers of being allocated car bays. Thank you very much for your time, and we hope you consider our comments favourably and in context to the minor amendments we are intending to make to this development approval. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The final public statement has been submitted by Linda Rogers of Park Street, Subiaco, but the statement will be read by Peter McDonald.
Thank you all. Dear Mayor, Council, Members, Staff and CEO, I wish to respectfully oppose accepting the landscaping plan for this development as presented. I also wish to make a few comments about aspects of the plan which, although cannot be changed, show the developer is gaining extra benefits by exploiting the planning system. The developer has been exceeded 14 extra apartments, including Subiaco's first snorkel apartments, as this development is close to a train station. Several of the apartments put existing residents who built within their iteration of planning codes at a disadvantage. They will be direct light deprived for a considerable time every year. The developer arranged for many significant resting and nesting trees, as well as a signature tree into Onslow Road, to be removed, promising deep soil commitments and an increased tree canopy that would eventually make up for the loss of the mature trees. At 3 presentations of this planning scheme, not a single individual plant has been nominated to be planted. There are a range of plants in a series of photo presentations, in effect a palette. However, most are unsuitable for small spaces and lack of light. Fruit trees are often referenced. However, given the light needed, the space for planting fruit trees and the continuous care needed considering bugs and fruit flies associated with fruit trees, that does not seem likely. Furthermore, except for stating that tenants will take care of plantings on the now reduced balconies, there is no plan for maintenance or care that exotic plants would need. Deep plantings for mature trees have become highly problematic due to the increased car bays wanted underground for the large number of apartments, despite being near the train station and not far from public buses. The car bays required are now the same number for the Bob Hawke College High School, where over 250 people move about every day. I believe that the landscaping should be more definite: Australian resting or nesting trees and plants for our birds, which are dying at an alarming rate. We do not need more exotic plantings. Each iteration of landscaping plans has been intentionally vague. The lack of specificity is not for taking time to select. There has been 18 months and several seasonal changes to observe for plant selection. Instead, not selecting plants has allowed the developer to downgrade the green planning commitment each submission. It is a strange partnership to engage a landscaper who says there are plants available, but selects plants that need space and sun, as well as illustrations that have no connection with the topography of the site. I believe we can ask more, specifically Australian or Western Australian plantings that can survive under conditions of minimal care and that give shelter and succour to our unique fauna. We should also ask for a realistic tree canopy undertaking. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the end of public statement time. And there are no petitions or approved deputations this evening, so that brings us to the confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder, please, for the minutes of the Ordinary Council meeting of the 22nd of March 2022. I've got Councillor Stroud and Councillor Kosovich. All those in favour? Anyone? Okay, no one against? That's carried unanimously. Okay, that brings us to announcements by the presiding member, and there's just one, and it relates to King Edward Memorial Hospital. But it's nothing too exciting, although it is a good news story. I was fortunate enough to be invited to the hospital late last week to judge the staff's Easter decorating competition. It was arranged at short notice, and I must commend the city's Community Development Officer, Russ Peary, for pulling things together. We were quite fortunate to be greeted by Dr. Jodie Graham, who's the Executive Director of the Women and Newborn Health Service. And Dr. Graham took the opportunity to talk to us a bit about the hospital and to give us a bit of a tour between some of the displays that we were judging. So it was a bit of a feel-good day, but there was some information exchanged, and the impression I got was that there might be some opportunities for our staff to speak with staff at the hospital over the next few years about some possible initiatives to build relationships, given that they're part of the community. They will be until they move away sometime around 2029. And as Dr. Graham explained it to us, there's about 1,800 staff at the hospital, so there's a workforce coming and going 7 days a week who are using our businesses and very much a part of our community. So in addition to the Easter decorations, it was nice to get a feel for what how the hospital's run. There's nothing else to announce, so let's move on to the reports of committees and officers. For the information of the public watching the meeting, it's intended that a number of the recommendations presented to this meeting will be grouped together and passed en bloc. And we do this because there's been no amendments or alternative motions received from elected members. So all things going well, we can carry some of these items without debate. The possible en bloc motion I've got in front of me at the moment is a motion which would include items C2, C3 and C5, which are proposed to be carried en bloc. Did any elected members wish to pull any of those items from the en bloc motion? Okay, item C2 did have a disclosure, so that leaves us with C3 and C5. So that's the Chief Executive authorisations and financial statements and reports for the month ending 28 Feb 2022. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please, for the en bloc motion? I think I saw Councillor De Vries and Councillor Hammersley. All those in favour? Okay, it looks like that's carried unanimously. Councillors, that brings us to the reports for debate, and we'll start with item C1, the Responsible Authority report for 97 to 101 Evans Street and 375 to 379 Railway Road. We've got an amendment submitted from Councillor De Vries, but first I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the officer recommendation. Councillor Hammersley moving. Councillor Stroud seconding. Councillor Hammersley, did you wish?
Thank you. Just briefly, yep. I think I'll be supporting this if it's amended, so we'll see how that goes. But just a couple of general comments. I think we're all well aware that this is a process where we're only able to address the amendments, and it's not a review of the planning decision that was made. And so I think based on that, with the amendment, I'd be content to support the staff's recommendation. I think one thing that is interesting to note, just in general though, in passing, is, as has been explained to us from the public gallery, the car stackers are a market response, and this is yet another of many examples of the mockery that is made of our planning system, which is all based in justifying height and all sorts of extra bells and whistles for developments based on the fact that they're near railway stations, and yet time and time again we see that we actually can't get people out of their cars. And so I just hope that the people that control all this are actually noticing that in Subiaco, which is very close to a lot of great transport and very close to the city, in fact it's walkable to the city, and we still can't get people out of their cars. So I just thought that was worth mentioning, and other than that I'll be supporting the staff recommendation if amended. Thank you.
Councillor Stroud.
Yes, I have a question first. Thank you, Mayor, through you, and that is, whether it would be possible for staff to add an advice note that refers to the statement by Linda Rogers on the landscaping. Or does that need to be in an amendment that we add an advice note? Because it's well thought out, well written. I just think perhaps it could guide the landscaper on our preference for natives and so on as suggested in that script.
Acting manager planning services. Can an advice note be added, and if so, how do we go about getting the note added, please?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So the landscaping plan that's been included in this particular application, as has been referenced, includes a palette of different plant species which is made available to the applicant to choose. So that has been reviewed by the city's design review panel, which includes a landscape architect, and one of the conditions requires the landscaping plan to be done in accordance with that particular plan. Any changes would have to be approved by the city prior to issue of a building permit. So, I mean, we could include an advice note to encourage the applicant to focus on native species. It's not necessarily a requirement, but there is a number of native species listed in the, I guess, the palette already. But there's, an advice note is not binding, but it can provide some guidance to the applicant in fulfilling that condition.
Okay.
Before you go on, Councillor Stroud, just a follow-up question. My understanding is that at present the responsible authority report would be as shown in the officer report. So would you be looking for an amendment in order to actually add the advice note?
Yeah, so we'd have to just put an amendment. You probably do it from the floor just to say this is what council is looking to do. And that it just supplements what I guess the decision already is that JDAP made previously and the condition that was imposed in July last year. So yeah, it would just be from the floor to that effect.
Okay, we'll give the other councillors some time to formulate a possible amendment if they're interested, but Councillor Stroud, did you wish to speak to the item?
My next question is whether it's worth, or I suppose you'll come to that, whether the first and second mover will accept the amendment by Councillor De Vries, but we'll wait till you get to that point. Okay, so firstly, thank you to the speaker who came to represent the company tonight, and for responding to a number of questions from our briefing forum. Also for taking on the issue of the importance of the dilapidation reports, which not only serves the community residents but also the developer. So thank you for that. And I have nothing more to say to this, but I'm happy to move it subject to that amendment just being put in place, which reinforces what the developer has already accepted to do. Thank you.
Thank you. That's probably a good time to see if the amendment can be incorporated. Look, the amendment we're talking about was submitted by Councillor De Vries, and it asks for a total of 18 dilapidation reports. Councillor De Vries, was there anything more to your amendment? I'm just trying to make sense of how it's been written up. Yep. Okay, so the amendment would be to amend condition 22 we'd be maybe talk us through it, because it says that the recommendation to amend condition 22 is removed. So we'll need something in its place to go back to 18, I would have thought, but maybe I need 22 in front of me.
Do you want me to clarify it? Yeah, the original Condition 22 was that there were 18 dilapidation reports, and the recommendation is just to amend the, so the recommendation in the officer's report was originally 22, and then they put this amendment in, so it's just to remove that amendment. That's it, simple. So it's clear to me, but could have been worded a little differently. The officers prepared it, but I understood it. So we go back to the original, which was 18 dilapidation reports. There was an amendment put in the last officer's report to reduce it to 4, wasn't it? Now I'm forgetting the numbers, but certainly 6 perhaps. So I think we've come back to the original 18. So it's just flipping it back. So I see that quite clearly. I hope other councillors do. I think it's clear that we don't need that amendment. And as I think it's one of these cases tonight where we've had the pleasure of support from the officers who can see the logic of it, support from the community who wanted it in the first place, and now, fantastically, support from the applicant. And I think that's been an important dialogue and discourse which we should be having. This is why these kind of conversations between stakeholders really matter. And when they are removed, when those channels for communication and direct communication are removed, we don't have effective planning decisions that matter to communities. Now, we're not saying these dilapidation reports are going to change the entire, face of the community, but they are one part of it. They're a facet. So having 50 metre radius and only, 6 select properties, because they're special, being chosen, I think that was really unfair, and I think other people on council have as well. So I think it's important to recognise that all people matter, all homes matter, not just the ones that are deemed to be special. So putting those back in to the report, putting them, and I think it's fantastic that the applicant has recognised that we do need to offer the community comfort, and I really do sincerely thank you for coming tonight and speaking to us, because I think that word good faith is important to maintain trust in the institutions, which is so vital to our community and so vital to local government and so vital to the planning policies that are there to protect us. So I do hope that I have a seconder. I haven't actually asked for it, but you did ask for clarification, so I went on to my little spiel before getting a seconder to my amendment. So do I have one?
Yeah, look, because of my inability to understand the amendment wording, I think we've crept into a speech, so we'll take that as your speech. Look, we may not even need a seconder to the amendments if the mover and the seconder of the original item are happy with it, and the sense I get is they are, and they're nodding. So we'll take the officer recommendation as amended, as per Councillor De Vries's amendment, and we don't need to debate that because the mover and the seconder of the original item are both happy. Councillor Powell, you had your hand up. Were you reminding me that there hadn't been a seconder, or was this? Yep. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Alex, Mr. Petrovski's hand is now down, so I'll take it that there's nothing further to add. Councillor Jennings, you could only have a question at this point, I'm guessing.
Thank you, Mayor. It is a question, and I'm just clarifying. So this will be the council's recommendation to DAP. This deals with that aspect of it, but how is that? And I think Councillor Powell asked that question by email. How will staff be dealing with that in their own RAR or amended RAR on the amendment? So how does that happen? How's that going to go down? I didn't see any emails about that finally, but I'm sorry if there were emails and I've missed them or have misunderstood. Thank you.
The answer we got from staff this afternoon, Councillor Jennings, was that Councillor De Vries' amendment adequately captured the matter, but your question does raise an interesting point about the amendment of RARs, because we've been told repeatedly previously that RARs don't get changed because they're the officer's work. So maybe I'll put the question to, we'll go to the Acting Director, Community and Development Services, who might be able to explain how Council's amendment tonight will get incorporated into the RAR.
Thank Thank you, Mayor McMullen. So the officer's recommendation was for the dilapidation report condition to go back to 6 properties. Now, if the amendment is carried, the responsible authority recommendation, which is the council's recommendation, would have no changes to the condition relating to dilapidation reports. So that condition will remain for the 18 properties as was decided at the initial approval for this development application. And that begs the question of the officer recommendation and then being at odds with the responsible authority report recommendation. Because of the nature of the council meeting and having the attachments prepared so quickly, it was not timely for us to actually change the officer recommendation. But we will have some time and the ability to change the officer's recommendation because the applicant is no longer seeking an amendment to that condition anymore. So we can ensure that our recommendation regarding condition 22 is removed and there's no mention to it before the responsible authority report is sent off. Hopefully time permits. Someone may come back and tell me that there's not enough time, but I'm sure we can work really, really quickly to do that tomorrow before we send it off.
Thank you. Okay, we've got an amended motion in front of us and apparently a mechanism by which it's going to translate through to the RAR. So I'll be looking for further speakers to the item as amended. We've heard from the mover and the seconder. Were there any speakers against the item? Anyone else who wants to take the opportunity to speak for the item? Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And just very briefly, I'd like to congratulate the staff on their negotiations with the applicants over the conditions. There were several that were contested and it now appears to have been reduced to just one over water harvesting. And look, I'd also like to acknowledge the applicant's offer to provide the dilapidation reports for all nearby neighbours, recognising that this had been a concern of the neighbouring residents and that they've dealt with it in this way. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Hammersley, did you wish to close? Okay, I'll call the vote then. All those in favour? The item's carried unanimously. The next item is C2, tender A6361 for the supply, lease and finance of cardio equipment for Lord's Recreation Centre. There's no amendments or alternatives, but this has been pulled from the en bloc because of Councillor Stroud's disclosure of interest. Do I have a mover? Councillor De Vries, and a seconder, Councillor Hammersley. Councillor De Vries, did you wish to speak? No. Councillor Hammersley? Okay, in that case, let's call the vote on the item. Councillor Burns, you've got your hand up. Sorry, I didn't see that. Do you have a question? We can't hear you.
I said I had my hand up before you called the vote. I had a question.
Okay, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Do we have a number as to the leasing, the total leasing costs against the actual total value of the equipment?
Director Corporate Services, is that something you could answer?
I'm sorry, Mayor McMullen, I'd have to take that on notice and see if I could find an answer to circulate to elected members.
Acting Director, Community and Development Services, are you able to answer it?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, I would be able to get that that answer to you pretty quickly. I'll just have to go through some documentation to find it. and I can get back to you.
Quickly, as in a few moments from now, and we should wait for you to find the answer, or would you need longer than that?
Probably a minute or two.
Okay, Councillor Burns, your hand is still up. Did you have any further questions?
Well, I'd like an answer to it, so that I can follow with the question. But I can tell you where I'm directing it to. Maintenance aside, which is an issue, but I'll remove the issue of maintenance of the equipment, which I don't believe is excessive. In fact, this is, new equipment, even though it is worked, highly used. But I'd just like to know if it's, for instance, if it's $300,000 worth of leasing fees and all the equipment's worth $300,000, arguably it would be a poor decision. So I just like to know what will the total cost of what we're leasing and what we're paying over the period, so to make sure the numbers aren't exactly the same.
Okay, well, we'll wait for the answer then, and that'll determine if you've got a question, and if so, what the question might be.
Yeah, thank you.
Just if I could, through the chair, there was an implied answer we previously gave, and I can't remember the exact percentage in relation to the interest component. It was 4 point something, so you could calculate it back in relation to what the likely capital cost would be. But Mr. Petrovski may have the answer now.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. That number sticks in my mind, and it was about 3.45%, which was the implied or implicit interest rate. So I haven't been able to do the back calculation, and I'm just still trying to grab what the. I know there was a document circulated to elected members separately, so I'm just trying to grab that, and hopefully I'll have the answer shortly.
While we're waiting for that, does anyone else have any questions about the item? Okay.
Through you, Mayor. Look, I can't locate that at the moment, but it was 3.45%. I can remember the rate on top of.
Okay, Councillor Burns, based on that information, you've got the opportunity to ask any further questions if you need, or you can also speak to the item.
I will ask a question through the chair as directed by you. So you're saying we have what we're being asked to approve, and it's probably better to see us as an accountant. You've got 266 odd thousand, excluding GST, for 3 years. So I gather that's not per annum, but that's the total amount of the lease for the 3 years. So projecting this 4% or whatever interest rate on top of it, right? Could the perhaps CEO give me the back calculation from that?
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Matt, I've just calculated it's $275,000.
So the equipment, your answer is we're leasing how much? Say it again. What was the number? Sorry.
No, sorry, I've done the back calculation the other way. One sec.
Yeah, so just doing things on the run, which one should never do, especially not being an accountant where I'm probably wrong. So I equate it to around just over $10,000 per annum would be the financing costs, but somewhere of that ilk. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, but what are we guessing? I'm happy to take a ballpark. What are we guessing? You know, I mean, if I went and bought all of this equipment, how much? You know, what's its value? Its retail value today against leasing it for $266,000 over 3 years.
Perhaps I can answer the question this way, which is slightly odd. As I've said, the financing costs somewhere around the $10,000 per annum for this equipment. The actual list price, the reason why, and as we sort of described last time, the reason why this type of equipment predominantly is where you would lease, and that's generally across the board, and that's for a couple of reasons. One is because generally these companies, through their purchasing power, are able to derive a slightly lower cost. That's the first thing that they do. And then secondly, they have ways in terms of after 3 years to be able to refurbish those and then on-sell them so they get a higher sales price. So that is generally why pretty much all the organisations, they'll generally buy their dead weights, etc., as you would call it, because they can last for many years. But these particular types of equipment are generally purchased via a lease, and that implicit rate was just over 3.5%. And so the financing costs would be equivalent to just over $10,000 a year would be my calculation off the back of an envelope.
Oh, no, okay, I accept all of that. Could you hesitate and I'll accept it as a guesstimate, but you mean is it $300,000 worth of equipment? It's $350,000, $400,000 worth of equipment. You know, I mean, if we, even without our ability to buy it at the rate this leasing company can, what's, you know, I just like a ballpark, how much my lease, how much the city's leasing cost is of $266,000 against the street value of the equipment. I just don't see it anywhere in the report whether it says we're leasing $500,000 worth of equipment for 3 years and it's costing us $266,000 or any other number. All I see is a list of equipment, but not what the equipment's worth.
So I would say the lease equipment would be approximately $30-something thousand. The capital price of the leased equipment would probably be around $30,000 less than the price of the total contract, is my guess. But you've got to understand, as I described to you, they have the ability usually to purchase at a lower cost, and they also have the ability to usually refurbish and then on-sell at a higher. So the question is challenging because what we are talking about is the way in which leasing companies operate and the way in which they purchase and then obviously on-sell the equipment at the end. So it's a whole of asset approach over 3 years. So it's not just about list price. So hopefully I've answered that. I imagine it would be somewhere in the vicinity of $30,000 or $1,000 or would be less than the price that's listed there that we're going to pay over that 3 years. Unless unless Scott has a better calculation than that, or Alex.
The total price with that interest rate comes up to about $239,000 for the value of the equipment. So that's less than the rate over the 3-year period.
All right, then I will through the chair, speak to the matter, if you'd like me to, or do you want to? Does anybody else want to speak first?
As far as I know, you're the only speaker to the item, Councillor Burns, so you should take your opportunity now.
Thank you. All I'd say, councillors, in considering supporting this, from what we've just heard, let's just, at least, put it in the back of our minds that we're within pennies paying, we're leasing something that arguably we could buy, for about roughly the same amount of money. Now, albeit that, and it does have a value at the at the end of the period, but we don't. It seems poor financials to me, and even if they do come and maintain it as part of the lease, I don't think the maintenance fees would be particularly excessive. So I think it's. It doesn't give me a particularly warm and fuzzy feeling, but at the same time, I'm not going to implore you to vote against it. But I think it should be acknowledged that we're leasing something for and pretty much buying it just over buying it without owning it. Close enough to it anyway. So I'll leave it in your hands. Thank you.
Okay, I don't think there's any other speakers. So, Councillor Hammersley, did you wish to close? Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? Looks like we've got 7 for. All those against? And 1 against, Councillor Burns. So the item's carried, 7-1. Okay, councillors, item C3 was carried on block, so that brings us to C4, which requires an absolute majority. C4 relates to the budget review for March 2022. Do I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor De Vries, moving. Councillor Stroud, seconding. Councillor De Vries. Councillor Stroud, did you wish to speak?
Can I reserve a right? I remember that was challenged once. So is that still, can I speak later or I have to speak now?
Well, it's an interesting question with no firm answer in my view, but we'll see if anyone else wants to speak. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I've actually got a question before I speak, and it relates to the budget item of 100,000 for the city to undertake a partnering project to deliver a public art initiative within the city. Is it possible to do an amendment? This is a question for, I don't know, whichever staff member you direct it to. Is it possible to make an amendment that excludes that item from being part of or approved, or however the council deals with it, as part of this review this month, and that item then be referred brought back for consideration at the next ordinary council meeting? Is that an amendment that can be done from the floor, or is that too complex? Thank you.
Well, the CEO is probably able to answer that.
Thank you, unless Mr Hawkins wishes to add anything. I mean, there's either or. Obviously, numbers change, etc. if that amount is excluded. So there's 2 ways to do it, I suppose. One is that you would pass it as it is, and then request a report back on that particular item, and thereby, the city doesn't proceed. So that's one way of doing it. The other way would be to make an amendment to deduct that from the amounts contained within the budget review as at March. So either or.
Can I ask another question, please, Mayor?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, which would staff prefer? Because that would be, I'm thinking, if it's permitted, and it sounds like it is, I would be proposing that amendment, and or one of those two options, so that it is brought back, so it's not rejected outright, it's just brought back for further consideration and it's not implemented. Thank you.
Director Corporate Services.
Through you, Mayor McMullen. I'm getting the feeling that my understanding is we've put something in the EMIP to elected members, enabling them to provide feedback to you as the Mayor, if they wanted this to be a subsequent report to Council in relation to the matter. So my suggestion would be is that all the budget review does is provide an allocation within the budget, and if the council wants to consider the matter to then provide approval to the works happening and the funds being provided to the other party, then that could be a subsequent report to council. And we've already got a process in hand, I believe, to enable councillors to be able to do that through the EMIP.
Councillor Jennings, any further questions?
I guess it's a little difficult to frame this as a question, but I suppose I can put it as the EMIB. Well, is this correct? The EMIB, as I understood it, did ask for that feedback, but it wasn't issued until late Thursday afternoon, which would be, it's just brought forward a little bit because of the Easter break, and that's perfectly understandable. But by the time the EMIB was issued, this agenda item had been issued with that report in it, and so and any amendments, etc., had been were not able to be made formally at that stage because they were meant to be in by 12 p.m. on Thursday, which was also understandable because of the Easter break. So yeah, it's there might be a process, but it hasn't been able to be enacted, I guess, because of the way the timing has happened, so that this could be forestalled and that particular line item could be dealt with by separate report. Is that correct understanding? Thanks.
Yeah, if I could, through the chair, in terms of Councillor Jennings, that timing is all about right. Look, I'm entirely comfortable if the budget changes were adopted tonight, that I understand that there's some questions in relation to this that have been raised here, so that would not mean that we would action this and sign the contract, so we would bring it back. So as I said, either or, you can adopt the budget review as it is. That doesn't mean that we're going to go out and sign this contract and spend the money. We bring a report back, but if you felt more comfortable removing it, you could do that as well. As I said, either is easy to be actioned, because if we then brought it back, this item specifically at the next council meeting, we would include within that a budget adjustment to do that if council resolved to do it. So either works, but if you adopt this as is tonight, I suppose what I'm saying is we're not going to go out and spend that money, because we understand that council wish to have some further information in relation to this item.
Okay, Councillor Jennings, did you want to raise an amendment from the floor? That is still an option.
I guess, leading on from what the CEO just said, I've got another question. I guess would it be possible? What I'm looking for is a workshop to discuss that item before the next meeting and before any such report. And it may not need a report to council in the end if we have a workshop. So I wouldn't necessarily want to burden staff with having to come up with this report at the next council meeting. And personally, I would be happy to accept the CEO's assurance that no contract will be entered into, and the matter would be brought to a workshop to discuss, as soon as possible when it suits staff and before the next meeting. So that's my position, but I don't know how everyone else feels about that.
So if I could, through the chair, I think that would be practically a good way to go in terms of adding it to a strategic workshop, and then councillors are going to have more information, and then should council wish it to come back via a report to council, we can do that at that particular point in time. And, aligning with the process we have in place, noting that obviously the timeframes, as you described, sort of got in the way.
Councillor Jennings, any further questions or an amendment? I don't think you'd want to raise an amendment by the sounds of it.
I don't need to raise an amendment on the basis of the CEO's assurance that that's how that item will be dealt with. And I don't know if you want to do some kind of straw poll with anyone else, but I imagine that people might be comfortable with that, but perhaps you just might want to get a head nodding around the table to see if that's the case. Thanks.
Well, workshops and future agenda items are kind of two different things, but look, I think usually the CEO and I review the workshop calendar, and I think we can add it to the program, and it could be a short discussion if you're the only one who wants to discuss it come workshop time. But I think for the purpose of moving forward, we can agree that that it will be the subject of a workshop and a future report if needed. Okay, so the mover and the seconder haven't spoken. Councillor Jennings has asked questions but not spoken either. Was there anyone wanting to speak to the item? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to add my voice to that comment about, only because you did state that it might not be necessary that Councillor Jennings might be the only person that raised the matter. I actually did raise the matter at the briefing forum, which Councillor Jennings, I don't believe attended. But I'm also very much in favour of it either being fully clarified and accepted by documentation or being workshopped. I think there's a lot more I'd like to know about it anyway before that we sign it with getting anywhere near putting pen in hand to be signing contracts for $100,000. Thank you.
Okay, so we're agreed it's going to be workshopped. Did the mover want to speak to the item before we call the vote? No. Okay, all those in favour of the item? That's carried unanimously. Okay, councillors, C5 was carried on block. C6 is the next item. I'm just trying to find it, but I know it relates to a submission on proposed development assessment panel reforms. And we've got an amendment from Councillor Hammersley. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the officer recommendation? Councillor Powell and Councillor Kosovich. Councillor Burns, your hand is still up, but I'll assume you just haven't put it down. Thank you. Councillor Powell. Sorry, Councillor Powell, your microphone.
Got it, I think. First off, I want to thank staff for this report because it was produced at such short notice. We found out about these reforms just over 4 weeks ago, and this appears to be the government's modus operandi with controversial planning decisions. Short consultation, including public holidays, such as the Easter just passed, because I don't think the government really wants to hear what citizens have to say. In fact, I feel they're trying to exclude our voice. So despite the much abbreviated timeframes, I congratulate staff on managing to produce a report, and I agree with their recommendations. Local governments are the best place to assess significant planning proposals because they know the local planning laws, which they drew up in consultation with the community. Earlier tonight, we heard how that local knowledge and consultation has led to a developer recognising concerns about dilapidation reports for neighbouring properties. They heard and acknowledged those concerns at a local level. It was just the city, the residents and the developer involved at a community level. I don't think you're going to get the same result with a group of unelected planning industry members meeting in the Department of Planning offices in the city. The officer recommendation notes the omission of local government representation on the Special Matters panel and the further centralisation of planning and the negative effects that will have on transparency. There are serious flaws in this reform. The Special DAP will have 7 members, none of whom will represent the local community. The panel will largely be made up of industry players deciding other industry members' projects, and practically their decisions will be unappealable. And to bring it out of the policy speak to real life level, we know in Subiaco that planning decisions have real life consequences. The government's decision to impose upzoning next to our railway stations has one couple in my area publicly telling the Minister their property valuation has dropped by $200,000. And a subsequent decision by a DAP in one of these newly zoned areas has another resident selling up because their apartment will be in permanent winter shadow. I think they've also lost significantly on their property valuation. So these decisions can have big impacts on what is many people's largest asset, their homes, where a decision can transfer a good portion of the asset value of one homeowner into the hands of another. Now, these special DAPs will hold sway in special precincts declared by the government. No precincts have been nominated for Subiaco, but as the officer's report notes, the city's train stations could be arbitrarily called Metronet at the stroke of the government's pen. There'll be no consultation and no request. Effectively, the city's planning for anything of 10 units or more could be decided in William Street with minimal community input. I also wish to raise another matter in the staff report, and that is that the department will be charging developers upward of $80,000 to process their applications, or 3 or 4 times as much as the city, and the department will be keeping all the money. While the city will still have to do considerable work like compliance and clearing conditions, it won't get a cent for it. That's likely to become an additional burden on the ratepayer. So not only are the government reducing the community's already very limited rights, they're going to be charging ratepayers for that pleasure. These are anti-democratic reforms on a planning system that's already manifestly unfair and unjust, and that allows a developer to appeal every decision and the community no rights of appeal. Look, I know there's an amendment in the wings, so I'll leave it go up there for the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Kosovich, did you wish to speak?
I'd just like to, first of all, congratulate Councillor Powell on an excellent assessment. Disenfranchising the community and local governments is not a smart move, to my mind of thinking, by the state government. They may as well just brand these state government development panels. If you are going to expect that when the Minister uses the regulations, where she doesn't even have to take them out of Parliament, even though they dominate the Parliament, to make these changes, and then think that the community will embrace them, or even care if the community embrace them, then that is a serious bit of poor thinking and poor decision making. I'll leave my comments at that. Thank you.
Councillor Hammersley, you've submitted an amendment, and I think rather than asking the mover and the seconder of the item to accept or not accept, we'll just we'll hear some debate on this because there's a few different parts to it. So I'll assume you'll move, and I'll be looking for a seconder. Councillor De Vries. Councillor Hammersley, did you wish to speak to your amendment?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I've put this amendment up because although the staff report was excellent in dealing with the technical issues that have been raised, I thought that it was important that Council consider whether something more should be said, something more general. And so these points that I have proposed in my amendment are really addressing the lack of reform of our planning system. We all know that this journey that we've been on since 2011 really had its beginnings in systems that have been put in place in other states of Australia. We also know that it has come from successive governments who don't like the answers that communities give them. So their response to that was not to say, well, this is a democracy, and in a democracy it's not just a question of whether everybody in the state agrees with what should happen in somebody's community, although that is a factor. It's very important that the people who are most directly affected by decisions of government are not only consulted, but respected. And that is not the system we have in this state. What is striking is that although this system was implemented in other states before it got to Western Australia, the one thing we didn't adopt was appeal rights for third parties. Victoria has fairly extensive appeal rights, New South Wales not so much, but at least some. Western Australia, nothing. Not even the state government has reserved a right to itself to appeal the merits of a major planning decision. It's just not good enough. Our whole democracy is based on the rule of law, and the law is not present in our planning system when it comes to approvals. And that's a very risky place to be, both in the short term and the long term. In the short term, because corruption can easily find its way into a system that doesn't have independent judicial officers watching what's going on. But secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, is the loss of trust and confidence in institutions that govern our lives. A democracy really is only fair, it is only going to survive if it's just, and this system is not just. And so over time, people who are disempowered will just gradually become less and less respectful of the institutions that are so important to keep us all living together in cohesive communities. It sounds dramatic, but it's just a death by 1,000 cuts. And I think I've said somewhere in my reasons, I can see the arguments for the expediency. And of course, that's what our leaders up on the hill in West Perth are very, very focused on. They're very focused on expediency, but they're not focused on the long-term consequences of that expediency and who pays for it. Individual human beings pay for it, just as we're seeing now with the schmozzle that's happening in the building industry, because we just wanted to create jobs. It's a very, very just and noble goal, but it has a consequence when you do things in a way that has, as I say,
Yeah, just take a moment to finish up.
Yeah, so I think the thread is that, I think it's worth us restating. I mean, these things have all been said over and over again, but I do think it's worth restating it because these things do actually have real impacts on individual people, but more than that, they have long-term consequences for society. And I want to see Australia be fair, and it's not in this state when it comes to planning. Thank you.
Councillor De Vries, do you wish to speak to the amendment?
Yes, I fully support the words of three fellow councillors. I support Councillor Hammersley's amendments to the submission on the proposed development assessment panel reforms. I also accept the officer's recommendations and note that the report highlights the lack of transparency and local community representation as deficits in these proposed reforms. The proposed reforms to create 3 super DAPs reduce the capacity for fine-tuning to the needs of a particular community. The arbitrary nature of the special matters DAPs will bring uncertainty to the DAP system. The proposed reforms seem ill-considered. Changing any system is complex and requires rigour, research, fine-tuning and an adjustment to the various stakeholders' needs. It should, in my opinion, also require an examination of the pitfalls of the current system to determine who has lost out, who has benefited. This was, after all, a system that was designed to ensure that the weight of planning decisions was more firmly in the hands of the professionals and less so in the hands of the community, and to ensure that the state planning framework was given an expedited pathway. Given that the history of reform has not been successful to the DAP system in increasing transparency and efficiency, it is reasonable to question whether the current ones will do so either. Concerns about the efficacy of the current iteration of the DAP system are well-founded. Walga, in their 2020 review of the DAP, says, the review found that the DAP system was failing to meet its stated aims with reductions in reliability, efficiency and consistency of decision-making and a decreasing level of transparency in the DAP system overall. The reasons behind the current reform seem to rest on 2 prongs, one that give DAPs more immediate power to make planning decisions and approve developments that are perceived as necessary, even if not in keeping with local planning schemes, and the other to reduce public scrutiny. Special matters DAP will come directly from the department, recommendations for the special matters DAPs will come directly from the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage and bypass local government entirely. The opaqueness and arbitrary nature of the creation of special matters DAPs is another key difference to the current system, with the shifting sands of who and what might be subject of a special matters DAP potentially exceedingly disruptive to local communities. Lack of certainty and lack of continuity is as highly disruptive as it gets. Should local government retain some modicum control, such as through third-party rights of appeal, there would at least be some opportunity for local governments to defend the merits of their local policies, and by being more transparent, serving DAP members would be more accountable in decision-making and condition setting. As already stated, the current DAP system appears not to have achieved the efficiencies it claimed would justify its existence and has been the subject of a public hearing in 2015, challenges from various individuals, local lobby groups, local governments in the Supreme Court, and even by Walga. Walga, in that previous stated review, said that the key findings provide clear evidence that the DAP system continues to fail to meet its original aims and objectives, and that the various reforms to the system have not improved reliability, efficiency, and consistency of decision-making, nor increased the proportion of strategic and significant development proposals. DAPs have already been shown to reduce transparency and remove the nuanced ability of local planning instruments to protect and ensure proper and orderly planning in our communities. In my opinion, these proposed reforms implicitly show disapproval of diversity of opinions and registers that it does not want to deal with the messiness that democracy brings. Democracy's strength is the capacity it has for self-correction and to encourage active criticism of decisions so that poor ones may be averted. When we lose those checks and balances, we lose the efficacy of our political system. For example, the unintended consequences of these reforms might be to increase the inefficiencies within the building sector, leading to a greater number of bankruptcies. There have been 3 recently, with many more predicted to come. Stand, please. I've never done this before, so it's a first for me. One area of decision making cannot be uncoupled from another when the consequences are not favourable. It seems a little self-evident that an industry that is self-regulated...
That was the 30-second mark before Councillor De Vries, but if you could just take a moment to finish up.
It seems pretty self-evident that an industry that is self-regulated by its peers might run into some dilemmas when it comes to establishing priorities. I urge the decision makers to think deeply about the consequences of their intentions to create special matter DAPs and 3 super DAPs. I hope that an independent, robust and transparent analysis of the current DAP system is put on the public record before proceeding with any further reforms. I would hope that third-party rights of appeal would become part of the West Australian planning system. One of the core strengths of democracy is the willingness to accept criticism. Don't silence the critics, embrace them. They are not naysayers or NIMBYs. They are part of the intrinsic fabric of our democratic system, and their voice should not be silenced. I commend the motion to you.
Councillor Burns, did you wish to speak to the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I support it, and I thank all the comments that have been made by the councillors that have spoken. I will briefly address something that Councillor Hammersley said, which is more on my mind than anything than what we're actually dealing with. She referred to the old expression, death by 1,000 cuts. I sort of look ahead at, we're doing the best we can. We have to do what we can with this report. But what concerns me is not, taking this down to 3 DAPs and the other systems they're trying to put in place. It's, really, what's the step after that? What is the final cut? And that's 1 DAP, or just, one government instrumentality making all planning decisions, and us having no voice whatsoever. So, looking down the road, I don't think it's going to be very far down the road. That's where my concerns lie. I think what we're doing, the work, the councillors, Councillor Powell, Councillor Kosovich, Councillor Hammersley, the words spoken just now by Councillor Hurst are all excellent, and I truly appreciate the work they've put into them. And obviously I haven't gone to the same extent because my fears lie just a little bit further down the road. But I think we're going to be down that road before we know it. Not asleep to comment at that. Thank you. But I do, I fully support what everybody's doing. Thank you.
Any speakers against the amendment? Any other speakers for? Councillor Stroud.
Yes, I'd like to support the amendment, and I would like to, Councillor Hammersley spoke very eloquently on the matter, and Councillor De Vries. I just think we should re-emphasise what this amendment is about. Point 1 is restore community power over the development of land in their district, including having local governments as decision makers on development applications relating to land in their district, and provide third parties with appeal rights against the DAP determinations. To me, we'll continue to go down this very narrow path servicing developers with their reform as long as we accept donations to political parties. And until that is stopped, unfortunately, we're going to have this very biased approach to our planning system. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other speakers to the amendment, I'll call the vote on the amendment. All those in favour? The amendment's carried unanimously, so that brings us back to the substantive item as amended. And so far we've heard from the mover and seconder. Ordinarily I'd call for a speaker against at this point, but reading the room, there may not be one of those, so anyone who wishes to speak on the substantive item now has a chance. Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be really quick. Thank you, staff, for your good work. Support everything you've written. Thank you, Councillor Hammersley, for bringing that amendment on. And I think it also reflects, well, it was something that Councillor White also brought up, that we should, that would be a good thing to include in the recommendation, just mentioning about our overarching concerns about the system and, reiterating those concerns or the principal ones. And, I do want to support all the comments about, I don't think this is a democratic system. It's not just, as Councillor Hammersley said, and these reforms are not making it any better. So I would like to see a return to something that's more balanced and just in terms of the decision making. And it cannot possibly be the case that the only decisions by DAP that are, and other planning authorities or planning decision makers that are correct are the refusals and the conditions on approval, because that is how our system is set up, so that the only wrong decision is an approval, is a refusal or the conditions of approval. Thanks, that's all I have to say.
Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Today I sent you an email asking if I could move an amendment from the floor. I just wanted to point that out to you so that you didn't ask for the first speaker to close. Thank you. I'm hoping that perhaps the first and second mover will take it on. Do you want me to talk to that now?
Thanks for the reminder, Councillor Stroud. Maybe don't speak to it just yet, but remind us what it was. I did see the email come through, but just remind councillors and anyone watching.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just a very small amendment, and it's about including a heritage expert in the pool of experts that the Minister chooses for these 7 Special Matters DAP members. I raised it at the strategic workshop when we talked about the reforms. So at this stage, there is actually no mention of a heritage expert. They talk about a diverse range of industries and backgrounds to the developer and planning sector. They mention transport and urban planning and architects and so on, but there's absolutely no mention of heritage in any form. And a DA could either have a heritage component in the design or even in its location. We have one that could end up at a Special Matters DAP, which has both in consideration. I believe omitting the expertise of a heritage architect or engineer just appears to be an oversight in the suggested membership selection. And I'm also concerned that WA heritage is continually under siege from insensitive development. So I recommend this to you. And the words are just to include 4.4 in the attachment 1 under the section Special Members DAP structure. And 4.4 would read, a heritage expert be included in the pool of experts from which the 7 SM DAP members are nominated from. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Stroud. Look, it's self-contained enough that we can probably ask the mover and the seconder if they're happy to take it on board. Councillors Powell and Kosovich, are you happy with the amendment, or do you think it needs some debate? The mover and the seconder are both happy to take your amendment on board, Councillor Stroud, so we'll consider the substantive item amended. So just to be clear, we've now got C6 as per the officer recommendation, and it's been amended by Councillor Hammersley's amendment and further amended by Councillor Stroud's amendment. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak before I ask Councillor Powell to close? Councillor Powell, did you wish to close?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would. And I thank my fellow councillors for their contributions. I think they've been most pertinent about this reform package. But look, I'd like to make two other observations. The first comes from the Royal Commission report into the casino in Perth, where there's also big money on the table. And the Anne government's supervision was found badly wanting. The Royal Commission refers to regulatory capture. It describes a situation where regulators act or appear to act in the interests of the businesses they regulate, not in the public interest. In effect, the regulator becomes a servant of the agency it's supposed to supervise. Now, in the case of planning, as Councillor Hammersley observed, the state hasn't even reserved the merits review appeal to itself. And that, to me, the government giving up its own right of appeal would appear pretty close to regulatory capture, where it is subservient to the desires of the industry it is supposed to be regulating. I also want to add an observation very recently by Australia's Human Rights Commissioner, Lorraine Finlay, on the state government's unilateral decision to extend the COVID emergency in WA. And that decision included extending the life of the SDAU, which the government set up at the start of the pandemic. The SDAU has a perfect 16 out of 16 approvals in favour of developments, and usually against the wishes of the local community. I mean, what sort of government uses a pandemic to push a few more dollars into developers' pockets? And doing so, it's created an overheated building industry where the costs are skyrocketing to the benefit of no one. The proposed special Batters DAP is really just the next iteration of the SDAU. So to Commissioner Findlay's comments, the state of emergency declaration transfers an enormous amount of power to the executive and therefore to public servants and bureaucrats, and reduces parliamentary oversight and scrutiny. To me, that sounds like the Human Rights Commissioner is giving us a strong caution about losing democracy in WA. And one final point, as support for the DAPs has been bipartisan, with both major parties, I think, addicted to the developer donations to fund their campaigns. I think, as mentioned by Councillor Stroud, the sooner real political donation laws come into place, the better. And finally, I would like to know where our state parliamentarians, one Liberal, one Labor, in the Western Suburbs, stand on DAPs and DAP reform. Thank you.
I'll call the vote. All those in favour? The item's carried unanimously. Councillors, the next item is C7, and it concerns the appointment of two community representatives to the Economic and Business Development and Sustainability Committee, formerly known as EBSAC. I think we're actually going to have to go behind closed doors for this, because we need to select two people. Therefore, we're going to have to discuss the personal affairs of people, which is a reason to go behind closed doors. Do I have a mover and a seconder for a procedural motion to close the meeting? Let me just read out the section of the Act. Close the meeting in accordance with Section 5.232B of the Local Government Act. Councillor Kosovich and Councillor Stroud. All those in favour of the procedural motion? Anyone against? Councillor Burns, I didn't see you vote on the procedural motion to go behind closed doors. Look, I think because we're on Zoom, we'll take that as a vote for. There was a bit of a delay there, but you're voting to go behind closed doors?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The procedural motions carried unanimously, so we'll go offline for a second. Okay, behind closed doors, Council's taken a vote on item C7, which relates to the appointment of two community representatives to the Economic and Business Development and Sustainability Committee. And the motion that's been carried reads as follows. The following community members are appointed to the City of Subiaco Economic and Business Development and Sustainability Committee from 19 April 2022 to 21 October 2023. Radi Stulich and Jason Murphy are the two community representatives. Okay, tonight there were no elected members' motions of which previous notice has been given, and as far as I'm aware, there's no urgent business to raise tonight. So that brings us to the end of the agenda. I declare the ordinary council meeting of the 19th of April 2022 closed at 7:39 p.m. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody.